Okay, today I'm going to teach you guys about local storage. So, local storage is a property of the DOM window object. That's also session storage is very similar to local storage. They both store data in a browser. The data is stored in an array of key value pairs. The local storage property stores data without an expiration date. It will be stored indefinitely unless explicitly deleted. Whereas the session storage um, will store it until the browser tab is closed. So session storage is also a member of the DOM window object, and it also stores the data in the browser in key value pairs, but it only stores the data for a single session. The local and session storage can be accessed via the window.session storage or window.local storage properties. You can also access them by calling directly local storage or session storage without using the window object. The properties return a storage object that has methods and properties of its own. The storage object methods and methods are well, first one is the key method, which takes the parameter n, which is an integer, and it will return the name of the key of that nth key. So you can use that to loop through and get the names of all the keys in your storage object. To save data to a storage object, you can use the setItem method, which takes the parameters key name and key value. The key name and key value are strings, and so all of the key values are stored as strings. So the key name is the name of the key, obviously, and the value is what's stored in that value as the value. To read data from the object, you use the getItem method with the key name. So it will look up that key and return the value. And to remove data from the object, you can use the remove item, and you specify the key name, so the key you want to remove. Remove all data from the object, you use the clear method. The data can also be accessed for addition and deletion via dot or bracket notation like other objects. So in the examples here from W3 schools, the local storage object and session storage object have a key click count, and it is accessed via dot notation. And as can be seen here, the number function right here is used to convert the string of the click count into a number, so they can use the addition to create a new value, and then that value is then stored back into the click count key. And if it's not initialized, it will set it to 1 and displays it and tells you how many times you've clicked. Same thing with session. The difference between the two is the local storage will store that click count indefinitely, whereas the session storage will store that click count until you close the window and get rid of that and open the window again. It will reset it back to 0. The storage object has a property called length, just like many arrays and whatnot. It stores the number of items in the object. So this example comes from Mozilla Development Network or Developers Network, and they populated 3 items into the local storage, and then they used the local storage.length to give the number of items in the storage, and it will return 3 as long as no other objects have already been created in that local storage. I used W3 Schools and developer.mozilla.org as resources for my presentation here, and we're going to go ahead and look at my example here. So this is very similar to my example from last week for Ajax. I've got a pandemic.json object or a file here that is the roles and abilities of pandemic characters, like pandemic roles for the pandemic board game. And it's got the different versions, different expansions for it listed out. in an array. So our HTML, nothing super fancy here. We've got open JSON calling load storage as the onload function of the body, and it's opening the pandemic JSONs to load all this storage initially. Got some text here just describing what the local storage API does. I've got the display all function button here, which will display everything. And I've got selection, which I use local storage to populate the selection list. Use the local storage in the pandemic JSON file to populate the list. And then on change, it will call the version select function, which will change what displays. And I've got a delete local button and then reload local storage button, which call functions respectively. So one calls load local, the reload calls load local using the pandemic JSON file. The delete calls a delete local function. I've also got some examples of session storage. I've got some span objects in here that will display the number of times you've clicked on the display pandemic roles and the number of times you've changed the selection. That's all it's doing, is just kind of showing some examples of how session storage works. Coming over to the local storage JavaScript file, we've got our OpenJSON function with the callback function. We've got our load storage function, which what it does is it calls load local. Let me scroll down here to look at load local real quick. Checks to see if storage is supported on the browser. If not, it will return an error down here. So if it is, it will parse the JSON file. It will loop through it, converting the versions into keys and the values into stringified objects. So we have a string to be stored in the key. And then the will notify us that it's loaded, or sorry, then we check to see if it has loaded, if it's already loaded into the local storage. If it's already loaded in the local storage, we don't need to reload it again. So what it will do is it will check that, and if it's the same, it will go ahead and flag us, notify us on the console, and it will exit out of the loop instead of loading in the values and reloading each value. We've got our notification local storage data has been loaded, which can be seen here, and that is displayed through the pandemic display. I also have this function return true if it's successful and return false if it fails. And that's for use up here. So if it succeeds, we then check for session clicks and select changes. It's for session select changes and display those accurately here. So far, I've got none on this session. And then we'll load options, which load options comes down here, takes the select list object here, the element here, and it will look at the local storage, get the length of the local storage. It will loop through it using a for loop, creating options and adding the value of the option as the key and the inner HTML as the key as well. So we have our drop-down list of the versions, and then we'll append those to the version select list element. And then after we do that, it's also, if it fails, it will notify us that it failed to load the data, and it will create another P element in here. So we will actually have both notifications. So we'll have your browser does not support web storage. This page requires local storage support. And we'll also say failed to load data into storage. And that's what that does there. So that's what happens when we initially load the page. Now, once we load the page, we can click display pandemic roles. And what that does is it comes here, displays. It will first update the click count. So we scroll down here. We've got 1 on our click count now. It will then, it will update that. It will then come down here. We've pulled the select list of values. So we're checking the select list to see if it's null. So we're looking into our local storage key to see if that returns null. If it returns null, then we've got an error. There's not local storage handled, so I'll demonstrate that in a minute. We also log that. And otherwise, we have take the length of the local storage object. We'll display the header, pandemic board game. Then we'll loop through each one, getting the key and value, and we'll parse the value. JSON parse the value again back into an object. So we can pass that into our display version function, which displays it in the nice table. Role abilities and information there is can be seen here. We've got our header, we've got our table, creates the table, very similar to the one from last week. And where was I? Yes, display all, okay. And then what we'll do is it appends that all to a text variable, our text variable. And then at the end, it displays that in the inner HTML of a div to display all of that information, overriding the local storage notification saying the data was loaded or the data was deleted, which we'll see that in a second. So the next thing we have is we can pick a specific version, which does a version select. It updates our count for a version select and displays that. And does the same thing. It checks to see if there is a key, a local storage key that is pandemic in the lab, or what have you, whichever option you selected. And if there is not a key, it throws an error. If there is, it displays it. It takes the select value and parses the item at the select value in the local storage and passes those through our display function and then sets that as the inner HTML. So then we've got the other function we have is we got delete local storage. So we click this, that does it says local storage deleted. So it cleared out all of our local storage. So if we try to display the lists again, it says error, local storage is not currently loaded. We don't have any local storage, so we can't pull it out of local storage. Same thing here. If we change this, it's still an error. Click reload, notifies us, oh, it's been reloaded. Now we can pick a different version and it displays it, updates our counts down here still. So our counts are still up. And so what will happen is if I reload the page now, counts are still the same because it's still the same session. However, if I come here to a new page, this page has it reset to 0 again. That's the session, because that session, this is a different session than this session. For this session, if we close this one out, now we've got 0 count again, so we can display it. We can delete our storage, we can display it. We can load our storage, we can display it. We can delete our storage, and you see it's updating the count, but it does not roll over from session to session. And that is all I have to say today. Yeah, we'll discuss more on Saturday.